Welcome to the Good Bad Mad podcast, a show that's here to share the ins and outs of creative careers, connecting the aspirational with the experienced, with your host, me, Meg Ellis. Our guest for this episode is Paul Hart, the artistic director of the Watermill Theatre in Newbury. It's a small 220-seat theatre in the middle of nowhere in a converted watermill, and it holds a renowned reputation in the British theatre scene. I'm chatting to Paul about the theatre and what it takes to be an artistic director. Enjoy. Paul, hi.
Hi, Meg. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, not too bad. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. I've watched from afar many a year, which sounds really creepy. But
No, go on. Remind me of your connection. Were you local to here?
yeah, always kind of gone to the Watermill and trying to be work there for years. Actually, I applied for many a job.
Oh, cool.
Including yours, which I wasn't at all qualified for. But hey, I thought I was going to go for it anyway.
Why not, eh?
But hey, I'm glad it went to someone who was qualified.
I'm not sure that's true.
So thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of it.
Absolute pleasure.
Our whole thing is really about passing on your experiences and your journeys so that the next generation can hear it and not necessarily have to fight so hard to learn the lessons that the previous generation did, and just open those doors that might necessarily not be open if people don't have the connections. Should we start? So you're the artistic director of the Watermill Theatre in Newbury. How would you describe the theatre?
Well, the name of this podcast is very suitable because it's a mad old place, and it's old being the sort of operative word, really. It's been around for a long time. It's still, like all of my favourite theatres, I think it's a found space rather than a space that was built to be a theatre.
I mean, it's full of character, isn't it?
Definitely full of character, and it's very individual and atmospheric. And as you walk into the space, you walk past, the original water wheel, and there's a river running under the building. And it's just like, it's been obviously converted to a certain degree, but that in itself was a sort of mad experiment of someone who cut out the ceiling without really any, he's subsequently admitted, without any real architectural knowledge of what sort of state it was going to leave the place in. But it's turned into this lovely, musical kind of configuration in terms of what it is and what it looks like now.
It's very small and intimate, isn't it? You go there for a very, very personal experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's sort of the format of it is almost like a sort of Spanish court theatre, I guess. So slips that go over the stage, and kind of quite democratic, and as you say, a space that's perfect for the sharing of ideas and intimacy, and seeing things close up and seeing sort of what happens behind the scenes as well. You can often peek, depending where you sit, you can peek into
definitely,
see what's going on. So
I guess your job as the artistic director is to really cater to that space and create work that works with the space, rather than kind of is either squashed by it or shrinked by it.
Yeah, there's a sort of range, I think, of, absolutely, as you say, playing into the space. So some of the stuff we've done, really goes down that route of, something like Crazy for You we did a couple of years ago, which there's a bit in that piece which is set in an old creaky old theatre in the middle of the desert, and it was quite fun to sort of play around with the conventions of the space and make them specific to the world of the piece, and also to kind of celebrate theatre through that landscape as well. But then there are other things that we do that I think really kind of push against the space as well. And a brilliant director called Kate Budgeon directed a production of Oscar Wilde's Importance Being Earnest for us last year, which was like in a sort of white floating space. So like the set kind of felt very separate to the building, and that was kind of fun as well in a very different way. So Yeah, you're always kind of looking for, I think you're right. You don't do anything that doesn't acknowledge the space in some
Mm.
kind of way. And that's, I think, really important to the kind of individualism of the work that we make and the uniqueness of
Mm.
the experience for
Well, that's
you.
it, isn't it? It certainly stands apart and stands unique to the kind of traditional end on stages of the West End, you know?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And what's so weird about what the work that we've done historically here is it translates really well to
Mm.
touring and to West End or whatever,
Yeah.
because, well, I don't really know why. I think about this so much, but actually, I think the sort of the sense of individualism, often breeds a level of creativity because you're sort of solving problems.
Yeah.
And so that, in itself is quite fun
Mm.
and breeds us, a different kind of work maybe to what's seen elsewhere. But in terms of the actual physical translating from one space to another,
Mm.
the space, when you take the sort of slips out of the equation, the size of the space isn't far off
Yeah.
sort of proscenium, a standard proscenium
Yeah.
stage. So it means that it costs a bit of money to
Mm.
upscale for those kind of venues,
Mm.
but it's doable and achievable, I think, based on the space that we've got here. So it's sort of the best of both worlds from that
It is.
point of
I
view.
mean, the Watermill has a fantastic reputation amongst the theatre community in terms of quality and also transferring, like you say, you tour all over the country, but also you kind of route quite a number of West End shows as well.
To be honest, I think the best work we do is work that is created here,
Mm.
usually without that expectation. Like
Yeah.
quite often we get approached now to do things that people want to end up in the West End or whatever,
Mm.
and I don't know. I think that in itself is a pressure, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. If something's small and just for you, then you can just make it what you want to.
Yeah, and I like the idea that something can be a failure. That I think it's quite important that you
Yeah.
start a process, without trying to create a hit. I
Mm.
don't really like that way of working.
Definitely. I mean, you've got the dedicated audience of the locals to kind of support that up and down and experimentation as well, don't you?
Yeah, we've got this amazing thing of on the first day of first day of performances with us, we quite often have like the whole front row is booked out by the
Mm.
same group of people who come to every first show, and a lot of the rest of the audience are the same,
Yeah.
and they literally just come up to you at the end and are like, "That was really great. It wasn't as good as whatever it was." And
They
you get
don't hold back with the critique.
no, absolutely. You know exactly where you stand.
I
And I
love
love
that
that.
though.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're so on board. And as you say, up for, I don't think anyone comes here to sort of see work that's playing safe. I think they come
Mm.
here to see work that's a bit different. And I love that about our audience.
So let's take it to like backwards to someone who is just entering the kind of world of theatre. They hear the title artistic director, and they go, "What does that mean? What do you do? How would you explain your role?"
Yeah, well, my role specifically is sort of twofold in that it's a joint artistic director and executive director
Mhm.
role, which I think is quite common.
Mhm.
So you're ultimately responsible for the running of the theatre and the wider business,
Mhm.
and then from the artistic point of view, I suppose what I always thought about of an artistic director was the person who programs the work.
Mhm.
I mean, there's more to it than that, but I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. You're the person who makes decisions in terms of, what the work should be. And, you're sort of thinking about that in line with all sorts of things in terms of, what the next steps might be for the theatre and what the wider strategy for the theatre might be. But ultimately, the thing that really excited me about running a theatre was, the artistic director is the person who chooses the plays
Yeah.
and curates a season.
Mm.
And I was sort of fascinated by that and had always, felt that that would be a cool thing to do.
Oh, definitely. You're kind of like in the seat of power. You decide what is the entertainment for everyone for what, a year at a time?
Yeah, we do sort of usually sort of 6-month programs, but yeah, I kind of I think in years really in terms
Mm,
of the variety of work over that time.
mhm,
We usually do about 12 shows during a year, so
mhm.
it's a real mix of youth theatre and uh, what you might sort of describe as main house programming. So yeah, it's like a massive thing to curate work
Yeah.
for that length of time and pull together a season and the creatives and
Mm.
the playwrights that you want to work with.
Where do you start with it? Because I know the Watermill does programs a lot of Shakespeare sometimes and a lot of work with actor musicians as well. Do you just kind of start with those staples and go, oh, what haven't we done in a while? What's new? What's coming up?
Yeah, I mean the program is sort of underpinned with a few slots that are regularly there. So the summer musical, as you
Mhm.
say, with which we always do with actor musicians.
Mhm.
That's become a big staple of what we do, and the summer show is sort of our biggest show
Yeah.
traditionally of the year. And we always do a Christmas show, which is a reinvention of a sort of classic tale as opposed to a panto. So you sort of know that the latter half of the year is quite fixed in terms of knowing that those two slots are there, and so you're kind of building on that with the knowledge that that within that year you probably need a comedy. You can't have everything as really really dark, but also wanting to kind of push your audience to engage with new plays.
Mm.
Perhaps one of the things I've looked at quite a lot is, as well as the sort of traditional musicals, developing new musical work and bringing work over from America and doing sort of first productions of stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you have your ear to the ground quite a lot then, looking for new talent, new writers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've really tried to sort of build that up over recent years. And one of the things we do, well, we do a new play each year now, for example, which often tours to rural venues as
Mm,
well. So playing sort of village halls, and we do another show each year that goes into schools, for example. So
mm,
there's a real opportunity there to work with people who are really coming through the
mm,
ranks, and perhaps quite early on in their careers, and often giving people their sort of first break.
mm.
So yeah, that's a big focus for us.
So, I mean, not only are you deciding what work to create, keeping the kind of business, the finances all kind of straight and working, you're also educating the young community as well. I know you're very, very interactive within the communities, running drama classes, youth clubs, all that kind of thing. How do you balance it all in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as sort of one big thing in some ways, in that there's quite a lot of crossover between those things,
Mm,
between the work that outreach does, which we really try to sort of embed
mm,
alongside the main house program, and often work quite collaboratively in that sense. And
mm,
um, I think the thing I've always been aware of here is that because of our setting, which is out of a town centre location, in a really sort of exclusive in
mm,
terms of the offer, how do we get people to come and appreciate, the kind of respite that
mm,
this place has to offer,
mm.
and making sure that that is an offer for everyone, as opposed to, well, I won't name anywhere else, but some arts venues which can be considered to be quite exclusive. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
there's definitely a down to earth feel
Yeah.
about the Watermill. There just is. I mean, there's no pretension, there's no inaccessibility. It's just a very comfortable place to be. You feel at home immediately, even if you're not a theatre buff.
Mm.
It's just one of those places, and I think that's certainly why it's been a favorite of mine for many, many years. Let's talk about how you got into theatre. Like, where did you start? What made you want to be a part of this world?
I guess the absolute starting point for me was at school and stuff. I got involved in some bits and pieces, which I think like because I was quite shy, I
Mm.
think quite a lot of, which is interesting because I talk to people, a lot of people who work in theatre who often say that they were the shy one in the
Yeah.
class. And that sort of seems so, yeah,
Contradictory, but
contradictory, doesn't
there
it?
there is that thing about being someone else or finding your
Yeah,
voice, settling into a role and just doing it, you know?
yeah, exactly. And I wasn't really comfortable in that environment. And I think it was like a sort of form of escapism or something that drew me into it. Um, and yeah, I loved it and was felt really supported in that world and enjoyed doing it and got a real buzz from it.
Mm.
So it became a sort of continuation from that, and people introducing me to the right stuff to go and see, and starting to get passionate about theatre in particular and
Mm.
that medium, and going to see shows in London that, yeah, like that sort of took that thinking on to the next level.
Mm.
And I suppose there were two key people that had an impact on that, and it's sort of amazing actually looking back now, because some of that work that I was seeing quite early on
Mm.
was, I really fell in love with going to see stuff at the Donmar.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely, just responded to the work that at the
Yeah.
time Michael Grandage was making there. And the same with a director called Ed Hall, whose work I really loved.
Mm.
And I wrote to those two directors. I don't really think I wrote to anyone else, but I really, was really inspired by the work that both those guys were doing.
Mm.
And yeah, extraordinarily, they both wrote back and were really supportive about me sort of being like, I think this is sort of what I want to do, but I don't really know
Yeah.
much about it. And both sent a note that was really encouraging,
Mm.
and it's no coincidence that I ended up working really closely with them both.
Mm.
So there's like little things that for
Mm.
they won't even remember, but those little notes were
Yeah.
such an inspiration to me that it was like it becomes a tangible thing from
So,
something you're very removed from.
yeah. I think people sometimes really underestimate the importance of mentorship and just simple words of advice that can be passed on to people. It can really change a trajectory
Yeah,
without too much hassle. Even if it's a sorry, I can't help now. Just the response sometimes is just a little boost, just to know that someone's kind of paying attention to whilst you're trying to figure things out, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I remember the letter that I got back from Michael Grandage was, it's really embarrassing to sort of say this, but one of the things I'd written a note going, I saw blah, blah, blah. I thought it was amazing. I think this is something I want to do. You've really
Mm.
inspired me as a director. And then at the end, it was just like, oh, and I don't know if I just thought this is what you did with famous people, but I was like, if you've got a signed photograph, I'd really love it. And he wrote me this really lovely note, which I'm sure I've still got somewhere. But at the end, he was like, "I don't have a signed photo, but sorry." And I was like, "Well, of course." But I
That's
think
so
that's
cool.
really, I've never raised that with him, but I think that's yeah, I think that's quite funny
I
now.
love that. I feel like at some point you should hand him a signed photo of yourself saying,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
"This is how
absolutely.
you
That's
do
a good idea.
it."
Yeah, exactly. I've got my little stack by my desk ready to send. No one ever asks.
I love that. I love that. So you badgered them, you wore them down,
Mm.
and did you shadow them? Did you join them as assistant?
Yeah, both of them very kindly offered me a job as an assistant at a point
Mm.
at which I didn't have that much experience really. So
Mm.
I did a year at the Donmar with
Mm.
Michael. They had, and I think still have, a resident assistant program, so I
Yeah.
applied for that and managed to get it, I think, the first time I applied, which was amazing. And yeah, I learned a lot through working with him. And then Ed, I ended up doing a bit of shadowing. I don't even think it was like a paid thing to start with,
Mm.
but he realized that I was really passionate about
Mm.
the work of the company he was working with, and so sort of developed a relationship with him and with
Mm.
them that meant, in the end, I worked with them for about 6 years.
Mm.
So really got to sort of know his working style and practices, and
Mm.
learn a huge amount about specifically about Shakespeare with working with him.
What were you kind of absorbing from him? Were you taking in details about how to work with peers, with cast members, or were you thinking like developing your own style as you were going on, thinking, "Oh, I might do that slightly differently"?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so interesting for me about those two people as mentors, in that
Mm.
what I responded to with Michael's work was his absolute precision. Like, I don't think there is another director on the planet who is like as precise and detailed as he is. And
Just
even
everything choreographed to a T.
yeah, exactly. Like, everything was there for a reason, and I found that, incredibly exciting,
Mm.
because, especially in the Donmar, a bit like we were saying with the Watermill space, the intimacy of it was
Yeah, it's a
everything.
lovely theatre.
Saw the detail of the work he was creating,
Mm.
and so I loved that. I really responded to that even before I knew sort of anything about directing. And
Mm.
then with Ed's work, the thing I was responding to was the sort of anarchy that he created on stage and the wildness of it, and I found that totally thrilling. And so I was sort of thinking, in terms of wanting to direct stuff, that I would probably use elements of both,
Mm.
and learn about both of those processes in terms of how they did it, and probably take,
Mm.
bits and pieces, and try and find my own sort of style, really. So I guess with Ed, because it was Shakespeare as well, like, he was so brilliant with kind of text work. And
Mm.
so, I think the thing with Shakespeare is that so many people are just scared of it. And I think to
Mm.
spend 6 years getting to see how he was working on text and working with actors and what to really focus on
Yeah.
gave a level of confidence in terms of then starting to do that yourself as well.
Mm.
I think a lot of sort of process stuff from
Mm.
from both of them was useful.
So, what kind of style would you say you have as a director? Like matching those two ideas. Like how would you approach a text?
The way I like to work is um, very ensemble focused. I
Mhm.
think it does combine those two approaches in terms of, I like the actor to feel in control of what they're doing and contributing to the sort of ideas behind it. And I like there to be, I think to be in the rehearsal room, you sort of want to feel like you're doing something different, that you're taking something in a new direction or whatever it
Mm.
might be. And I've absolutely, probably the thing I've sort of most enjoyed doing in the work I've made is working with actor musicians, and music being a sort of integral part of,
Oh, it's wonderful.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
wonderful.
that being a really
Mm.
important part of the process has always been quite key to me. And the thing I love about working with actor musicians is there's almost a sort of subconscious element to what you're creating, and
Mm.
an ability to work therefore in a very collaborative way, because they maybe understand the rhythms of a piece, or
Well, I guess you have to really trust them and trust in their abilities with the music, especially
yeah.
to kind of fit it all together as it comes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the work on the text, I think the thing I'm most interested in is, like, making sure we're not doing classical plays in a way that we've learnt to expect them to be done,
Yeah.
and turning them on their heads, and absolutely getting to the heart of
Mm.
what the writing's about, but maybe approaching them in a more dynamic way where we possibly can. That's my passion.
Do you have a favorite Shakespeare?
It does change quite a lot, but I find the one I'll keep on coming back to is Twelfth Night,
Oh,
because
Twelfth Night.
it's so perfectly balanced.
The production at the National a couple of years ago, Tamsin Gregg,
Oh yeah,
astonishing.
right. I didn't see that.
Oh, worth it.
I just think it's a brilliant
Yeah.
piece, and music is so integral to it as well. I
Mm.
think it takes it to another plane.
Do you ever have those moments when you're working with with things like Shakespeare, with the old greats, where you panic?
I definitely have done. I mean, I think what I've learned and what I've been really lucky to sort of be able to do here is to build a company of actors who you work with, where it becomes, a sort of collaborative and shared experience.
Mm.
And I find that takes the pressure off quite a lot, even when you're, potentially pushing quite hard to go down a certain avenue. I find that, psychologically takes a bit of the pressure off. But I
Mm.
think what I have sometimes experienced pre-working in that way is like actors come to Shakespeare with a very different set of expectations and very different processes in terms of how they work.
Mm.
And to stand up as a director and have the confidence to be like, that's useful, that isn't,
Mm.
is really difficult because you feel like it's Shakespeare and you've got to have a certain reverence about how
Yeah.
you approach it. The less that you do that, I think, the more interesting the work is.
Mm.
And so you've got to understand it and you've got to have a sort of baseline knowledge of what you're working with and how the text needs to be spoken. But you also need to create an atmosphere whereby you've got actors who sort of naturally are able to do that and aren't going to be worrying about it
Mm.
too much, because I think that in itself is sort of destructive. So it's about having the right people in the room that will go with things and absolutely challenge things, but
Yeah.
challenge things on the right basis.
I think that's the I mean, it's my favorite thing about working in theatre is really just trusting people to explore things and support each other, and not kind of be afraid to improvise a little bit now and then. What qualities would you say are essential to being a director?
For me, the most important thing, and I think this sort of links the two jobs really in terms of running a building and being a theatre director, both of which sort of come back to people management and working with people and collaborating with people. An ability to listen and take on ideas, I think, is the most important
Mm.
thing. To be adaptable and to like working with people. I think that's the most important thing about this sort of working in this industry, because if that isn't your sort of starting point, I think it probably becomes not very much fun quite quickly. But I also think, again, with both jobs, I think an ability to have what I always call a killer instinct. So, like, theatre is nothing without people who are prepared to take risks.
Mm.
And it's the point at which you take that leap. And it's about getting people on board with you in order to be taking that leap together. I think that's the biggest sort of skill that, definitely I don't get right all the time. But I think
You
that's
do
what
have
I look out for people.
you do have to be brave, I think,
Mm.
100%.
Yeah, and it's like, so you absorb, 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 take different points, of view on board, but there comes a point where you go, right, we're doing it,
Mm.
and this is it. Being prepared to fail, I think, is really key from that point of view.
Was that a big learning curve for you?
I think so. I definitely think early on, in productions, you're trying to think, but partly because of the way that the industry is structured,
Mm.
you're trying to make decisions that you think people will be happy with,
Yeah.
and you're trying to satisfy, the people who were in a position of power,
Mm.
and that, as we know, the best directors in this country are the people who have got themselves into a position where they don't have to worry too much about
Yeah.
that. So it's definitely something you have to bear in mind, but I don't think it necessarily means creating the best work.
Yeah. We're just mentioning how the industry is structured. What's your view on regional versus city theatre?
I was just thinking about that in relation to, the danger that there is around London being the sort of epicenter of
Yeah.
work, which for those of us not sort of brought up in London is kind of crazy, isn't it?
Mm.
Um, and I think the place where most people learn to fall in love with theatre, or the opposite in many cases as well, is in their local regional theatre. So it's so important from that point of view. And I've always wanted to run a regional as opposed to a theatre in London because of that relationship that I feel that you're able to build with audiences. And I think that's really, that's not to say you can't do it in some theatres in London, but I think the sort of immediacy of response that we were talking about earlier is really specific to this world.
If anything, I mean, I'm quite optimistic that recent events and COVID might actually push theatre out a little bit more.
It will definitely make people appreciate what they've got on their doorsteps as well. And, one of the things that I think is quite sad in terms of regional theatre is the amount of producing theatres that are left. It's shrunk massively in recent years. And I think to have places producing independent work is what cultivates opportunities, particularly for younger creatives and younger actors and people sort of coming through. So I think post this, we have to fight really hard to keep hold of that within our industry.
No, 100%. I think there's a very real opportunity for a generation of talent to be lost. So it's all about keeping them activated. It's going, we can still make it work. You're still here. There's still these opportunities. You just got to pinpoint them and go, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of talk, hasn't there, around the importance of theatre, because during lockdowns, what people have ended up doing is watching a lot of Netflix or
live theatre in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a bit like, in a way, I've got a bit bored of that argument because I'm like, regional theatre is important in itself. It's like an end in itself. It's not about I get that that's quite a good argument for politicians to sort of try and get their heads around.
Yeah.
But I also think not to underestimate the importance of the work that's happening in communities and work being produced on stages across the country is absolutely huge, and what a huge step back it could be if we lost that output.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I unfortunately couldn't make the COVID shows that you were running last year because I was in London, but I know several people who did go to the shows, the socially distant shows that you curated and managed to put on, and they just said it was a breath of relief, really, a breath of fresh air. And they were so happy that you managed to make it happen. Can I ask a little bit how it affected you as an artistic director, as a regional theatre? Overnight, things changed.
What was so extraordinary was it made me realise how much it's in our DNA as people working in theatre to keep the show running or to keep the theatre open. I don't think before this happened I could conceive of a situation whereby theatres across the nation would basically be shut down for at least an entire year. That just wasn't in anyone's
thinking,
and I know that's true of other businesses as well, but there is this kind of attitude of the show must go on and we'll do everything to
it is because it's more than a business, isn't it? It's your whole force goes into it.
Yeah, exactly. And we've done crazy stuff to keep shows running. I've been on to play parts in Christmas shows.
Did you have to step out from behind the scenes?
I did, yeah, literally, stepping on stage from my house because I'm the only person left on site. So
how was that?
Bloody awful. Absolutely ruined my Christmas. So that had happened 2 out of the last 3 Christmases. And the reason I did it was because literally, the kids are there in the auditorium and you're like, the choice is I go on and make an idiot of myself, or we
You sent them home crying.
yeah, and ruin their Christmas. So I was like, well, the
Mm,
show must go on. You've got to do what you got to do. Oh yeah, and all of that stuff, that sort of pressure you kind of build up to be like, we've got to do the show. We've got to do the show
yeah.
because we're a small theatre and we can't afford to lose the income, and
Mm,
all those things that you sort of think about. And then we're presented with a situation like this where yes, there's been a bit of help, but
mm,
still, who would have ever expected to be in a position where you have to get your head around shutting down the theatre, sending the actors home,
mm,
and all the other things we know in terms of the sort of pressures around
yeah.
that.
And how did the socially distanced productions go? Did you have time to rehearse, or was it just like, here's a script, go?
Yeah, well, there wasn't even a script actually. So the first thing we did was Pound of the Baskervilles, which
Mm,
we decided rather than doing an existing version that we wanted to use sort of elements of what was happening in the world
mm,
to make it specific to now. So the cast devised a version in a week. So I think we got clearance that stuff could happen outdoors.
mhm,
And then it took us a week to plan it and hire actors and build a stage and stuff.
mm.
And then they had a week to throw it together, and it was brilliant. It was
Mm.
it was really good. We were like, why did we bother doing 4 weeks rehearsals? So that was crazy. And
Yeah,
then, but yeah, all the outdoor stuff went down an absolute storm
it
because
did. I mean, talk about working under pressure.
yeah, absolutely. It was crazy, but it was awesome. Just to you go back to that thing of like
Mm,
putting on plays as a teenager with no
yeah.
resources or
Mm,
support, or making the posters
mm,
together and all that kind of camaraderie
yeah.
of let's
I
just make a piece of work is
I
great.
I guess it must give you some confidence as well in terms of, like, moving forward, that
Mm.
if things are gonna go wrong, you can deal with it as a collective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It definitely makes you appreciate the skills that you have within the team because we didn't
Mm,
have any money to
mm,
hire loads and loads of external people as much as we were like trying to,
yeah,
give work to freelancers. You've got to go back to the absolute sort of baseline of what you
yeah,
can do within the team. And
mm,
I definitely came out of it going, bloody hell, they're all so talented in terms of the speed at which they managed to turn it around and the knowledge they have of the building to be able to do that is really
yeah.
particular.
Mm. So just, I mean, to touch on finance, I won't pry too much.
Yeah, we've had, as you say, huge amount of support from people locally
Mm,
who just, are supporting us because they love the theatre,
mm,
and that's great. We haven't really had much help from the government apart from obviously the furlough scheme, which
mm,
has been useful, but also at times frustrating because you want to be working to get people back to work, and the
mm,
whole imperative of that
mm,
scheme is keeping people away from work. So that's been a real sort of balancing act for us, and
mm,
big decisions in terms of the risks that you can afford to take
mm,
on that basis, and but also trying to keep people involved.
yeah,
We've got a small team anyway, so
yeah.
you can't really do it without them. So that's been a balancing act, and but I think for in terms of my thinking at the moment, actually going into this year is sort of harder. Like last year was very much a kind of reaction to the situation.
Yeah.
And when you're actually planning for something that is sort of financially unsustainable,
Mhm.
that in itself is more difficult because none of us have any idea really how things are going to pan out.
Yeah.
And that you've already pulled in quite a lot of favors and asked quite a lot of your local supporters,
Mm,
and people potentially start to get a bit tired of that. So
mm,
so I think that I think we're not, no theatres are sort of through this yet. I think we've got a
mm,
long way to go, but we've got a huge amount of support to help us get
yeah.
through the other side of this.
So speaking for, I guess, regional theatres countrywide, I guess the message is get bums and seats as soon as possible. Like, don't be scared to come back to the theatres when they open.
Well, you know, the what we found was that people were really ready to return
Mhm.
as and when it was safe to do so.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for theatres, what maybe hasn't been fully sort of understood in terms of the structure of the financial support is how to, as you say, how to support venues reopening,
Mhm.
as opposed to, you know, yes, it's useful to support venues when they're closed to an extent,
Mm.
but when there is, you know, when we get to a point where it's safe enough to be able to come out of this, you know, it should be about not hibernating
Mm.
and supporting people to think creatively and think outside the box and
Mm.
do things in a different way, but support
Yeah.
as soon as they possibly can.
You're actually actively working on shows
Mm.
pre-production currently.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant to hear. Can I ask what you're working on, or is that top secret?
It's top secret because of rights stuff, but what we're looking at the moment is a kind of mix of work that we can do indoors with social distancing
Mhm.
and outdoor, more outdoor stuff basically. So we're trying to just keep some options up in the air.
Mhm. Oh, brilliant. And you're all working with each other via Zoom and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
How are you finding that?
It's all right. I mean, like, there's elements that you kind of go, oh, I'd usually have gone to London for that meeting, and it would have taken at least half a day.
Exactly. You're like, whew.
Yeah, and you're like, we totally nailed that in a 30-minute Zoom. This is great. Now we can do other things. But then there's definitely other situations where it's more difficult, as you know, isn't it? It's we're all kind of getting our heads
Yeah.
around that.
I'm just imagining I guess a real life enactment of Staged. Did you watch that over
Oh
lockdown?
yeah.
Michael Sheen?
Yeah.
Is it similar?
Yeah. Hopefully slightly less competitive, but yeah, there's definitely something about that. Trying to check in with people is more difficult, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
the little things that you kind of miss.
Mm.
And I think it was all like quite to start with. It was all new and all different, wasn't
Yeah.
it? So you
Slightly
know,
exciting.
kind of exciting. And I think now everyone's like, how long is this gonna go
Oh,
on for?
everyone's pretty done now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, difficult question, considering we're not quite sure what's gonna happen this year. But is there anything you're kind of excited for, or trends you're kind of excited to watch and see what develops?
I do think the whole thing of engaging people's creativity is
Mm.
having to be thought about in a different way, both for buildings, but also for bringing in freelancers to be
Mm.
like, what can we do here? You know, like, here's an impossible set of circumstances. How can we still make work? You
Mm.
know, I quite like that. I
Yeah.
think that's, again, that sort of goes back to the heart of why we all do what we do, I think.
Mm.
And that's a good thing. And I think that's great in some ways, especially for bigger organizations, to be like, how can you streamline your processes to do what's important, which
Mm.
is creating work and putting freelancers at the center of that and putting audiences absolutely at the heart of the experience.
Mm.
They're the things I've sort of most enjoyed seeing, you know, a sense of sort of realignment with those things and going, okay, this needs to be our focus now.
Mm. I mean, I've chatted to a number of people within the industry over the last year, and one thing that's really come out is clarity. I think a lot of people have actually shaken off the kind of day-to-day elements and actually sat down and talked with each other about issues within the industry and the great things about the industry, and they've just really, like, say, streamlined what actually needs to happen and get rid of all the fuss and bother,
Mm.
which somehow attaches itself to the theatre industry, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a Ian McKellen came and did
Mm.
his one man show here a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, and he I remember him saying to me that one theatre that he'd been to, that he was going through the list of jobs on the, you know, on the staff board as he got in, and he was like, don't understand what that job is, get rid of them, like focus on making the work.
Right.
And I think that's so interesting in terms of the way that organizations have grown, and where the sort of import has been put, and like no one would have wished this, and no one would certainly have wished any of the redundancies that are currently taking place.
Mm.
But it does make you go as an organization, let's really focus in here on what is most important. And we've really sort of increased the kind of resources we're putting towards artist development, for example, and making that a really sort of crucial part of our thinking going forward. Because you're like, well, for those people, particularly people who've recently graduated, like it must be so hard to sort of see the positivity at the moment,
Yeah.
and know that people are rooting for you to come out the other side of it. And I totally understand why drama colleges have to keep on like taking on students in terms of their financial model, but there's a bit of me that's like, shouldn't we just pause, like, and focus on the people who have got in and are graduating into a profession that is on pause?
It's really tricky. I mean, I know a lot of my friends actually graduated recently or were going through drama school mid-COVID, and to be honest, they felt very let down by multiple organizations. And I think that's because they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to, because they had such a set model of what learning how to be an actor is, and it all relies on that final showcase, doesn't it? And if that's not possible, they lose out. And I don't know, I think you're right. Encouraging them and finding new opportunities to kind of support them and maybe do showcases or that kind of thing would be crucial, because I don't know, the worst thing that can happen, I think, to a creative person is to be disheartened. Can you tell me about a bit about your artistic development programs?
Yeah, so we've really sort of developed the creative associate program that we have, which is focused on working with younger creatives. So we've expanded that a lot this year, but we've also been setting up a lot of online workshops with graduates. So particularly in the musicianship, for instance, and that's as much as anything about sort of brushing up on skills and processes, and just sort of reminding people tips on things that we look out for in auditions, and audition technique, and self tapes, and adapting to use of technology, and all those sort of things that are particularly kind of relevant at the moment. So yeah, just trying to sort of offer opportunities that people can sort of check in on, and have build some sort of relationship with a venue as well, I think is the main things we've been focusing on.
No, I think that's brilliant, and certainly having that kind of early years support in starting your career is going to be crucial. Like you say, with your mentors, you had 6 really good years of like on-site training.
Yeah, exactly. And what for me, when I started directing stuff here, the thing I loved about it was that it was a sort of opportunity to step away from the kind of noise of the industry in many ways, and just concentrate on making work, because that's the nature of what this place is. And so I've always been really keen to try and share that with as many people as possible, in terms of what you kind of learn about yourself when you're working in that kind of environment. I think that's really special. And obviously we've had to adapt that, because we can't do that in the same way at the moment. But I think it is, for all of us, about finding ways of like, staying fresh, keeping, confident, and getting ourselves into a place whereby we're ready to go when we can.
I think a unexpected gift of this for a lot of freelancers has been to take a break, not have to constantly hustle, have that little pressure taken off their shoulders just for a moment, no matter how good or bad it may be. It's a slight break.
As a freelancer, you tend to have sort of several ideas that you're pursuing at any one time, and you put a lot of pressure on yourself, don't you, to kind of make sure that they're always moving forward.
Yeah.
And definitely, people I've spoken to have got to a point where they're like, well, they can't at the moment. So, you have to kind of take a step back from them and go, is that the right thing? And if you're still really passionate about them a year later, then that's probably a really good indication that they're the most important thing that you need to be kind of committing to. So I think that's quite healthy in many ways.
No, definitely. One last question for you.
Mm.
What are the good, bad, and mad things about your job?
As I've sort of already said, this place is pretty mad. Like, I don't think there's probably a job like it, full stop. As I think I explained, I live on site at the Watermill, and companies come and stay here while they're in rehearsals and stuff. So everything about my job is not normal. Like, the office that I work in is in my house. You get all sorts of people sort of turning up, sometimes at really inappropriate times. So when I was starting the job, we were doing a sort of handover with my predecessor, and someone knocked at the door, and she went and answered it. And this guy was like, he didn't say hello or anything. He just said to her, "Can I flush your toilet?" And she just went, like, as if it was completely normal. She just went, "Yeah, sure," and then wandered back in the office and started carrying on talking about what we were talking about. And I was like, "Sorry, what's just happened? You've just let a strange man into your house who wants to flush your toilet." I never really got to the bottom of what that was about. And now quite. And now I'm in a situation where I quite often get a man come around and flush my toilet, which I presume is something to do with the sewage system.
I mean, it's got to be, otherwise I would put a lock on that door.
Absolutely. I think it's best not to speculate. Just let him in and let him flush his toilet if that's what he wants to do. Exactly. So there's just sort of weird stuff that happens all the time. Like, we're always woken up in the night with, the fire alarm going off, or, someone jumping in the river, or whatever it might be. The what, sorry?
The ducks or the geese.
Yeah, there's always some mad thing with ducks. Someone came into the office once and was like, just to let you know, that a duck has got into the shower room and is sat on top of the shower at the moment. So we had to go and try and coax the duck out of the shower.
I love that.
So it's always something. I mean, I'll never work anywhere that, just has all of those sort of weird things happen. But it's fun. It gives you a sense of perspective. You never get too stressed in a way about things, because you're like, well, I'm kind of out of control of many things in this environment.
Yeah,
that's pretty mad.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. You're an absolute superstar.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Bad Mad podcast. Please subscribe to check out the next episode, or leave a review if you liked it. You can find us on Instagram at goodbadmad, or at goodbadmad.com for additional resources and information. See you next time.